Welcome back to another episode of the Almost Aussie podcast, episode 22. Now it's been a little break, so give me a little bit of time to warm up. What happened? Basically, uni life. Dylan, you guys remember Dylan, right? He went living his best life on an island, so there was a bit of break there, and I've just been too consumed in thought to do solo episodes. But we're back now, so I thought I'd fill you in a little bit. Drinking a little bit of Buffalo Trace whiskey. It's good. It's good stuff. So basically, let's jump into it. I think one of the main things that's been on my mind recently it's the whole virus situation that we're going through, and all the all the protests that have been going on in Sydney and Melbourne, and I think some of them happen in Brisbane as well. Obviously against the lockdown, because people are just getting super pissed off that they can't work, they can't go anywhere, they can't exercise, they can't go into nature because of the strict lockdown rules. I believe my friend Stewie, she lives in Melbourne, and I think she told me that had 200 days of lockdown, like strict lockdown, which is not good. And right now they're going to be postponed for another month, apparently. So, it's tough because, at the same time you see people in America like Tim Dillon and Joe Rogan, and I'm a huge Joe Rogan fan. Huge. He's basically the reason why I love podcasts. And, I disagree with some of these things, and I agree with most of them. But in the past recent weeks, there have been there have been videos coming out where he's like, oh yeah, Australians, they're too docile. They just want to, cook steak on the barbecue while they're in lockdown. They don't really give a fuck, and they don't care because the government took away their guns, so they can't do anything about it. And, but see, the problem is, the way I see it, that's coming from a country that had over 300,000+ deaths from the virus, right? Whereas Australia had just barely 1,000. I know America has 350 million people in their population, while Australia has 35 million. But, if you were to scale that, you get India that has 1.2 billion people, but they still had 200,000 deaths at the point that I checked. I haven't double checked it recently, which I should have. But considering that they have a significantly larger amount of people than America, proportionally speaking, I suppose it's more than America has and more people than us. So if I'm confusing people, but still, and they have way less deaths. Now, obviously, America has been very loose in their restrictions in a way. A lot of states didn't really give a fuck. A lot of states did, and people were leaving California because of how fucking harsh the lockdown was. But all in all, I think the whole anti-vaccine movement is pretty strong in America, and they're far more outspoken about the freedom of speech, and I think that's very well reflected in the number of deaths from this virus that they had. Now they're criticizing Australia for being so strict, and one of Joe Rogan's things was why did they open the country up? They only had at the point in time, they only had 9 new infections from last year to now. So Australia had 9 infections in an entire year, right? And it was why don't they open up? There's clearly nothing going on. Well, because that's why nothing has been happening, right? No infections have been happening because the governments have always cracked down on the lockdowns very quickly and efficiently to prevent massive spreads, right? And only since all of these protests have been happening, Melbourne is getting like 90 to 70 new cases daily. Sydney is up in like 200, 300 cases. And, you know, hopefully all of them pull through and nothing really bad happens. But you kind of see the problem. And I guess what I'm getting at is the mandatory vaccine discussion that's been happening, right? So one of the big arguments why the mandatory vaccine is fucked up is obviously because, you know, you should have the freedom of what you put into your body. And the way the government circumvents this is by encouraging companies to get their customers vaccinated to use the facility, basically, right? If you want to fly with Qantas, for example, you need to get vaccinated. If you want to have if you want to go to the hairdresser and like do all these luxuries in New South Wales right now, that you need to get vaccinated, right? And New South Wales is like almost 80% of the population vaccinated, which is interesting. You know, it's a pretty solid job. Now, the other problem is that the vaccine isn't necessarily like other vaccines where if you get it done once, you create the antibodies and that just maintains you for the rest of your life, right? Like chickenpox, smallpox, all that kind of shit, polio. And the problem with this one is that they're talking about this will have to be a mandatory, and a quarter yearly or like every half a year, like 3 to 6 months, you have to re-get it. And that's where the problem comes in, right? So the government is mandating you to inject something into your body every 3 to 6 months. Because why, right? So as you know, vast majority of people that get COVID survive. It is only the minorities that get drastically affected by it, right? But because we don't really know who it affects that well, we can't run the risk of having just like an open borders, open everything, and just let whoever gets infected get infected. And that plays into America, right? So in America, they have opened their country and they basically said, look, whoever wants the vaccine can get it. Whoever doesn't need to get it. And I think, so I've been thinking about it, and I think one of the main reasons why they can do that is because there is no like government assisted or like free healthcare to their people, right? So if you get sick with COVID, it would mean that you're going to the hospital, it's all coming out of your pocket. So if you don't want to risk those massive hospital bills, you should probably get the vaccine, right? See, in Australia, it's a different story. Now, I know that other countries have a similar thing like Australia, but they have majority vaccinated. I don't know. Anyway, so in Australia, the problem is that you get Medicare, which is basically government-assisted healthcare. You can, if you're feeling sick, you go to the GP, it's bulk billed, free of charge, they tell you what's wrong. You can go to the hospital, get operations done. Obviously, you'll have a waiting list, but it is all free of charge. It's paid by the taxpayers' money, right? Like we are paying for this luxury for the fellow people in our community to have this freedom of, if their life is at risk, they can go to the hospital and we pay for them, right? Which is absolutely fucking beautiful, man. Because if you think about it, that's such a new concept throughout history that your community, like such a huge country, takes care of each other because of these facilities. It's a miracle by history's standards. I think that's safe to say. Now, the problem with the vaccine and the virus is that we all know that the vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting COVID, right? What it does is it mitigates the symptoms that you can get so that you won't get hospitalized, right? Like, so it feels, I guess, more like a flu rather than a fucking blood clot or like lung failure, well, and all the other things that you can get with COVID that they haven't figured it out yet, right? So if we don't have, like, I see the people's point that anti-vaccine people and like, not the anti-vaccine people, the anti-mandatory vaccination people, right? I see their point. Like, we should have the freedom of being able to choose whether we get the vaccine or not. But because we live in this great fucking community that looks after us for the majority part, right? We didn't have to worry about a lot of things, like obviously free healthcare, right? But because we live in this kind of place, if we do not get vaccinated, and I don't know if me saying this so many times will just get this podcast pulled off, but we'll find out. So because if we don't choose to get vaccinated, and we do on a large scale get infected by COVID, right, and it does have detrimental health impacts, what it will do is, with the free healthcare, we all go to the hospital to get treated, which is a great thing, but it takes a giant hit, I'd imagine, on the economy that we have to pay for, that people that have been vaccinated have to pay for the people's problems that are anti-mandatory vaccinations. So I think that's the biggest fucking problem right now, is to navigate this space of like free healthcare, government providing for us, but also like mandatory vaccinations, and whether we can like put our egos aside and do it for the greater good of our community, or we stand and fight for freedom, which is an interesting concept. If you have, I don't know if you have listened to, and you specific, if you have listened to Sebastian Junger's new book called Freedom, a lot of freedom is based on what kind of member of society you are, right? So it's the whole idea of the unspoken contract where, yeah, I want to be free. I'm going to live by myself. Okay, so I'm out in the wilderness. I got this like little house thing and livestock, but as it turns out, there are like people that are raiding places coming through. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my closest neighbor. I'm going to say, look, man, how about we join together and we protect each other so that they don't steal my shit and they don't steal your shit, so that if the time comes and they attack me, you come and help out, because I would do the same for you, right? So, essentially, we sacrifice freedom to be able to have the freedom of living fear-free and being able to rely on our community to help us out. So in a way, to gain this like bigger form of freedom, right? Like to be able to have livestock and property and growth, we need to sacrifice a smaller form of freedom to conform with the little community that community that we live in, to help them out so that they help us out to maintain this larger form of freedom, right? And that's what we are doing with the whole fucking country. That's why the world is segmented in countries, so that their ideals and their freedoms and their practices and culture gets preserved, because they all know that if something happens, they band together because they share all these commonalities and they have experienced life in that way for a long time. And that's the fucking problem that we're facing right now, is that, well, what's more important? Is it the community and the larger scale freedom that all of us can enjoy? Or is it the personal freedom that like the government doesn't get to say what we put into our body? And fuck, man, that's a tough argument, because personally, I don't know where I'm stand there. I like to think and talk about these problems, but I can't possibly invest into one sort of ideology, because both are super important, right? Especially in a capitalistic society, our individual freedom is what drives capitalism, right? Capitalism makes money based on selling goods to the individual inside of us, right? There's so many options for us to choose from to build our own identity and being free in who we are, that all these brands are making like all these different kinds of things to consume for us to pick from. Stephen West from Philosophize This had this really interesting take on society, and I think it will resonate in terms of the restrictions that we're going through right now. And he was talking about this scenario where he was in a bar, right, and at a restaurant bar, and he was sitting there just like grinning his face off. He was enjoying this fine alcohol. He was eating food, and then this bartender turned to him and said, like, "What are you smiling about?" And Stephen West, along the lines, like, I'm paraphrasing the story, but he basically goes like, "Look, man, I wake up in my own little palace, right? Like, I have this 2-story home. I got bathroom. I got all these like facilities that back in the day only a king would dream of. And then I hop into my steel horse that facilitates like 4 to 6 people, and I can put all these luggage in there. But the beauty of it is that it has the power of 200 horses, right? And I ride this steed to this beautiful like place where people feast. And then I go inside and I'm greeted by my own personal servant that brings me my food that is prepared by this high quality culinary chef. And I get to eat this food while I have this like television screen showing me the things that they think I want to see. And if I don't want to see that, there's 500 other channels meticulously programmed to provide the best possible experience for me. And so I resort to watching sports. And I'm watching this like newscasters that spend their entire life, or like sportscasters, whatever you call them, sport reporters, that spend their entire life studying this particular field to give me the best possible insights in what is going on. And then I watch this athlete who trained his entire life to achieve these inhumane feats that I could possibly never dream of, right? Never dream to achieve. He spent his entire life like training the best possible way of running this ball across the field while dodging all these other players. And that is just for my entertainment. He is doing that to get paid because we love to watch that. And then if I get bored, I can always just take out my phone and have the internet, which is a whole sea of precisely programmed algorithms that try to show me exactly what I want to see, right? So we live... The moral of the story is that like we live in this society that caters so much to us, and yet we feel so restricted and oppressed by it. And obviously, having these feelings of restrictions and oppression are important, because we should always strive to be better and have better things than what we do right now. But also, I think it's important to maintain perspective of what we do have. So I guess like when it comes back to the COVID stuff is I don't know what the best option is. I guess it's interesting to watch these times right now on how our society will navigate these waters, whether the mandatory vaccination will go through or whether people stand up against it, and what kind of solutions we come from there. But I think it's important to remember that around the world right now, especially in South Africa, with all the fucking riots and anarchy, if you want anarchy, you should really look to South Africa, because that shit looks fucked up, man. Like neighborhoods are trying to band together to protect each other from robberies and fucking gangs rolling through, while in other parts of town where it's absolutely lawless, there are like military tanks rolling through telling you what to do. There are gangs rolling through robbing you of your fucking livelihood. It's fucking brutal. And then you got, America just recently left Afghanistan, and look what's going there. It's fucking insane. Like, people are climbing on airplanes like on the landing gears in hopes that they could survive the flight away from Afghanistan. It like mothers and fathers are hoisting their children over the fence to like to the American and German embassies in hopes that maybe their kids will get to a better place. It's so fucked up what is going on there. And, you know, Yomni Park was on Joe Rogan's podcast and Jordan Peterson's podcast. And you should listen to it because she talks about the horrors of North Korea and how it's enabled by China. And Jesus fucking Christ, man, there is some serious fucked up shit going on in the world right now that in perspective dwarfs our problems. But again, you know, at the end of the day, problems are relative and we are struggling in a way and we do need to find a solution to this. So yeah, that was my little 20-minute rant on the problems that I'm seeing around the world right now. I guess I want to lighten up the subject a little bit. I've watched Free Guy recently, and I was talking to a friend of mine about it. And I think it's interesting how the hero's journey, if you don't know what the hero's journey is, I guess quick breakdown would be it's a mythological tale that is shared amongst cultures throughout the world where you have to leave the comfort of your surroundings and endure a downfall that you have to overcome and rise above it and be better than who you were before, right? And the hero's journey is basically a metaphor on how you should live your life and how to experience the greatest joys of life. And it was interesting in Free Guy how they kind of like how they moved that into the artificial intelligence, which is the game, right? Which is Guy, and how they kind of like. And it's interesting because usually Hollywood paints AI as this like world destructive algorithm that figures out that humanity is not worth keeping around and we should just get rid of all of it. When Free Guy, because it was humans that programmed the algorithm, right? I guess it's a romantic longing that maybe artificial intelligence, because it was the product of humanity, also kind of innately inherits the aspects of the hero's journey. And that was basically displayed in Free Guy, and like where he was doing great, and then there was a downfall where he realized he's an actual machine, but then they banded together and figured out how to reach that paradise at the end. I'm not really spoiling it. Maybe I'm spoiling it. Well, never mind. Anyway, so basically it was interesting how that, I guess it's juxtaposition of like human beings, artificial intelligence, same story. And I guess that brings me to a point of back to the article that I wrote about artificial intelligence and creativity. Oh, okay. So to tie this all together, this last segment that I want to do in my podcast, in my solo podcast, I want to share a little piece of great writing with you, right? I want to read out like a little poem or writing piece so that we get a little bit of culture in this in these episodes. And it's interesting because back to the artificial intelligence and stuff, one of the reasons that poked out on why artificial intelligence possibly can't be as creative as human beings is that creativity is not only expressed in the final product, but is usually mostly appreciated through the backstory through the background of the artist and how they came to create this product. Well, this artifact. And Rodin, he was the creator of the Thinker statue, you know, like that guy. He basically, he was one of the biggest proponents of, you know, the appreciation of the artist shouldn't lie within the final outcome of his art, but within the inner turmoil or like within the inner thoughts and of experiences that led him to create this art. And so I think that's a nice little thing to tie into artificial intelligence and, you know, kind of like show off what are some of the limits that it may have. Anyway, so we're going to go into this piece by Khalil Gibran. It's called On Children. And a little backstory behind this is that Khalil Gibran was a Lebanese/American poet. And in the turmoils of like wars and assassinations and starvation and the Great Depression, all of that, he took on this question of how can we possibly bring in children into this world? How can we raise them? What is the right way of raising them? And like, those are the problems that they were facing and we're still facing today. Fuck, man. Like, imagine bringing a kid into this climate. And I've spoken to many people that disagree of bringing kids in. But anyway, so basically he prefaces this poem of a young woman that was holding a babe against her bosom. And she asked Khalil Gibran to give her some advice. And so he created this poetic answer, right? Okay, so the laptop is right there, so I'm going to face away, which is kind of awkward. I'm going to figure it out later on how to make this better. Anyway. So he said, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. For even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he also loves the bow that is stable." Thank you for listening to the Almost Aussie podcast, and I shall hope to see you guys again soon. Thank you.